Acharya Essential Series is called His Mission's Roots. From the beginning, signs of Abhay Charan De's divine destiny had appeared. His birth by the Ganges on Nandotsava, the celebration of Lord Krishna's advent, his childhood devotion to deity worship, especially Ratha Yatra, Lord Krishna's chariot parade, his pure devotee's father's constant prayer that his son become a great preacher, and his stars and palm affirming that at the age of 70, he would cross the ocean, become a powerful spiritual leader, and open 108 temples. Srila Prabhupada, quote, "One astrologer, sometimes he read my hand. He said in Hindi, Hukum chalbe, your hand speaks that your order will be executed." By his own account, in 1922, when Srila Prabhupada and a friend first met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he was, quote, Gandhi's devotee. That's how Prabhupada referred to himself at that first meeting, Gandhi's devotee. Dressed in the white khadi of an Indian nationalist and boycotting all things British. So he was surprised by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's first words to them. Quote, "You are educated young men. Why don't you preach Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's message throughout the whole world?" Impressed by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's bold conviction, Abhay nonetheless felt compelled to test him. Quote, "Who will hear your Chaitanya's message? We are a dependent country. First, India must become independent. How can we spread Indian culture if we are under British rule?" Srila Bhaktisiddhanta replied that Krishna consciousness, the original pure consciousness of every living being, was too urgent to wait for a change in politics. Misidentifying with matter, suffering humanity was forever chasing freedom through temporary, earth-bound movements, including Gandhi's. But reconnecting everyone to Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and our dearmost friend, constituted the highest welfare work. Struck again by this masterful reply, Abhay's allegiance flew straight from Gandhi to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, whose mission would soon reignite Lord Chaitanya's divine movement throughout India. Quote, "I accepted him immediately," Prabhupada later recalled, "not officially, but in my heart," unquote. Already a husband, father, and an office manager at a Calcutta pharmaceutical company, Abhay decided to start his own pharmacy, expand the business, and thus contribute to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's mission. So in 1923, he moved his family to Allahabad and started Prayag Pharmacy, which soon flourished under his diligent management. His sense of mission would also flourish as he studied the writings of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta and his Gaudiya predecessors, the disciplic lineage from Lord Chaitanya. Excuse me, I'm going to have to close the window again. We're coming up to Guru Puja time, and it's going to be competing with the narration. I forgot to do that. Moment. Okay. The next section I call initiation. In 1928, when senior sannyasis approached Abhay for help, starting a branch of the Gaudiya mission in Allahabad, he was delighted to contribute his contacts and resources, and later became a favorite speaker and singer at the temple. By 1932, it had been 10 years since Abhay had met the saintly person he revered as his spiritual master. That autumn, when he heard that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was leading a massive parikrama around Vrindavan, the sacred place of Krishna's early pastimes, he briefly broke free from his business to join the pilgrims. Soon after he arrived at Koshi, the devotees were given the choice of visiting the nearby Sheshashayi Vishnu deity or staying to hear Srila Bhaktisiddhanta give his final talk before leaving the party. Srila Prabhupada, quote, "At that time, I think only 10 or 12 men remained, and I thought it wise, what can I see at this Sheshashayi? Let me hear what Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati will speak. Let me hear." Unquote. In 1933, while Srila Bhaktisiddhanta was visiting his mission's new branch at Allahabad, the local leader recommended Abhay for initiation. "Yes, I shall initiate this boy," Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said. "He is very nice. He hears me very patiently. He does not go away." Although Abhay's wife chose not to attend the ceremony, a brother and sister were present as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta gave Abhay the initiated name, Abhay Charanaravinda Das, the servant of one fearless at Lord Krishna's lotus feet. He also gave his capable disciple instructions to study deeply Srila Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which Prabhupada years later would summarize as the nectar of devotion, the quote, law book for devotional service. Srila Prabhupada recalled, quote, "From 1922, I got the impression of preaching Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's cult. That was the initiation by my Guru Maharaj. Then officially I was initiated in 1933. Very interesting how Prabhupada marks that first meeting where Srila Bhaktisiddhanta instilled in Prabhupada that outreach, that preaching spirit. Prabhupada says that was actually the real initiation, that change of heart, when his allegiance flew from Gandhi to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. Over the next few years, Abhay would meet Srila Bhaktisiddhanta perhaps a half dozen times, yet the talks were intimate enough to raise eyebrows. Srila Prabhupada, quote, "Sometimes I would talk freely with him and the godbrothers would become angry. They would say, 'Fools rush in where angels fear to tread.' I thought, I may be a fool, but what can I do? With my Guru Maharaj, we would talk so many private things. I was only a grihasta, but whenever I came, my Guru Maharaj would be very glad to talk with me." Unquote. The next section is called Blessings. Although an astrologer had predicted Abhay could become one of the wealthiest men in India, in 1934, bad debtors and cutthroat competitors obliged him to turn over the debts and accounts of his Prayag pharmacy to his supplier and former employer in Calcutta. That was Dr. Bose, Kartik Chandra Bose. After leaving a small pharmaceutical works to support his family in Allahabad, Abhay and a brother ventured to Bombay, seeking new sales and production opportunities. Lord Krishna, it turned out, had greater opportunities in mind. As in Allahabad, Abai met senior Gaudiya Math sannyasis who asked him to help them start a mission branch in Bombay. His preaching increasing since initiation, Abai soon helped them launch a successful center. On the evening of February 25th, 1935, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's 61st birthday, so it was Vyas Puja Day, 1935, Abhay delivered an English speech and poem to the members of the Bombay Gaudiya Math, capturing Srila Bhaktisiddhanta and his mission so eloquently that a godbrother dubbed him Kavi, quote, learned poet. So Prabhupada was selected to deliver the keynote address at the opening of the Bombay Gaudiya Math on the occasion of the Vyas Puja of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. Especially pleasing to his spiritual master was the couplet, quote, absolute is sentient, thou hast proved, impersonal calamity thou hast moved. When Abai submitted the speech and poem to the mission's English journal, The Harmonist, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta instructed the editor, quote, whatever he writes, publish it. That's huge. That Srila Bhaktisiddhanta gave that instruction. Whatever he writes, publish it. In other words, everyone becomes immediately aware that somehow this householder, Abai Babu, now Abai Charanaravinda, is actually an intimate disciple of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, because Srila Bhaktisiddhanta really appreciated how Prabhupada knew his mind, knew his heart. Whatever he writes, publish it. And he wants everybody to hear what this disciple has to say in that English language journal, The Harmonist. So that's the first blessing in 1935. Whatever he writes, publish it. The second one comes in July. That July, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta came to install the deity of Lord Krishna in Bombay and was pleased with the progress of the center. The leader said that much of the work was due to Abai Babu, who had collected funds and helped establish the new branch. Why is Abai living separately, he asked. He should be president of this Bombay center. And that was a sannyasi, that was Bhakti Saranga Maharaj, who was recommending that Abai Charanaravinda actually be the president. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati replied, quote, it is better that he is living outside your company. He will do, when the time comes, he will do everything himself. You don't have to recommend him, unquote. Mystified by what he had heard his spiritual master had said, Prabhupada later reflected. So Prabhupada wasn't there when Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said that, but he heard later what he had said. And then years later, Prabhupada told us this, quote, that means he was so kind that he expected that I shall do something. That was my asset, his blessing. And I was thinking that this mission must be done very nicely. So desire was there and blessing was there. Yes, there was no question of my qualification, unquote. So that was a second blessing. It was a kind of prophecy that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta knew what his disciple Abai Charanaravinda was actually capable of doing. November 1930, so that was the second one. So February, July, and then later that year in November, there was Kartik. November 1935, once again found Abai with his spiritual master, on Vrindavan Parikrama, this time at the most sacred place for Gaudiya Vaishnavas, Radha Kund. Walking with his intimate disciple, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta confided grave concerns about dissension among their ranks. Since a wealthy Calcutta patron had constructed a palatial headquarters for the mission, his senior disciples had been quarreling over who would have the best room. If in his presence his leading preachers were becoming attached to position and opulence, what would happen in his absence? Deeply concerned, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta said to Abhay, Agun jwalbe, there will be fire. One day there would be fire in the Calcutta Gaudiya mission, and that fire of party interests would spread and destroy. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta then said directly to Abhay, Amar ichha chila kichu bhai karana. I had a desire to print some books. If you ever get money, print books. Standing by Radha Kund and beholding his spiritual master, Abhay felt the words deeply enter his own life. Quote, if you ever get money, print books. So right there, that's the seed, that's the origin of Prabhupada's emphasis on book production and book distribution at Radha Kund in November 1935. That grave blessing mirrored a grave reality in Abhay's life. Although he was trying to execute his spiritual master's mission by becoming wealthy, his Bombay business ventures were not bearing fruit. Despite Abhay's assurance he had new plans to expand, his situation especially disturbed his wife. Whenever Abhay visited his family in Allahabad, he tried to involve her in preaching programs at home. But when interested guests would come, she stayed with the children in another room, sipping British tea. And this section is called Confirmation. Although Abhay had already contributed much to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's Gaudiya mission, donating money, helping launch the Allahabad and Bombay centers, submitting excellent English offerings. In December 1936, he wrote his spiritual master a letter asking if there was some way he could contribute more. Prabhupada later recalled the highlights of his spiritual master's reply. So this is what Prabhupada told us was in the letter. Quote, I am fully confident that you can explain in English our thoughts and arguments to the people. This will do much good to yourself as well as your audience. I have every hope that you can turn yourself into a very good English preacher if you serve the mission to inculcate the novel impression of Lord Chaitanya's teachings in the people in general, as well as philosophers and religionists. Little more than a fortnight after Abhay read this letter, his spiritual master passed away. The same instruction he had received at their first meeting was now confirmed. Another confirmation followed while Abhay was reading a Bhagavad Gita commentary, stating that one must accept the order of the spiritual master as one's life and soul. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's order was now the very purpose of his life. This section is called War. The quote, fire in the mission broke out almost immediately. Although Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had clearly ordered his disciples to form a governing body and work, quote, conjointly, some leaders began competing to replace Srila Bhaktisiddhanta as the mission's supreme spiritual authority, as well as the controller of its assets. The fighting ended up in the courts, but because none of the parties was authorized, the unified Gaudiya mission Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had led throughout India and beyond fragmented into isolated temples. Quote, living outside, remember that's what Bhaktisiddhanta said, it's better that Abhay live outside. Living outside, Abhay felt inspired and protected by the order Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had given him. Yet the disunion of the Gaudiya mission was heartbreaking. In 1938, he dropped his Bombay ventures and moved his family back to Calcutta. To maintain, he began to produce pharmaceuticals in the front room of his flat. Deepening his study of his spiritual master's books, he spoke Krishna conscious philosophy to whoever would listen, determined to somehow carry on Lord Chaitanya's movement. In 1939, Abhay wrote an introduction to the Bhagavad Gita, indicating his intention to translate and comment on the entire text. Impressed by Abhay's writing and preaching, two sannyasi godbrothers gave him the title, Bhakti Vedanta, quote, one who knows the end of knowledge, devotion to Krishna. When World War II broke out that year, England drafted India into the war effort. In Calcutta, Abhay would endure bombs and man-made food shortages as he and a few close godbrothers, survivors of the Gaudiya mission's implosion, continued to study, write, and preach the remedy for all suffering, Krishna consciousness. In 1944, on Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's birthday anniversary, Abhay launched an English devotional journal, Back to Godhead. So again, it was Vyas Puja. It was 9 years later after that, 1935 Vyas Puja, when he gave the speech and read the poem, that Prabhupada launched in 44 on another anniversary occasion, BTG, offering spiritual solutions to material life's endless problems. BTG saw print only twice that year, owing to the Indian government's severe rationing of supplies, including paper. Abhay's messages were scarcely noticed, much less valued. Even less so at home. After the war ended in 1945, Abhay saw a good opportunity to expand his pharmaceutical operation in Lucknow, 600 miles northwest of Calcutta. With enough profit potential to expand BTG and better situate his family, Abhay made a big capital investment. It was actually thousands of, I think it was 20,000 rupees. But when he called the family's best servant to come help him, the family would not let him go. Indifferent to Abhay's preaching ambitions, or even an opportunity to improve their own living standard, the family he was supporting was now becoming a useless burden. In a letter dated November 13, 1945, a disgusted Abhay wrote his servant. So here's an excerpt from the letter. What's the point in holding you back with an excuse that there is no servant or maidservant? I tried to serve them enough by keeping enough servants, maidservants, and cooks. But up until today, they have not become attached to devotional service. So I am no more interested about those affairs. Prabhupada is flatly stating to his best assistant, whose name was Gauranga, that, you know, these people are useless, and I'm not really inspired to support them. But he was dutiful. He was the husband and he was the father. But he's revealing how he's really not encouraged by their lack of interest, not only in Krishna consciousness, but even in improving their own lot. Even before this development, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had begun appearing to Abhay in dreams, asking him to enter the renounced stage of life and preach full time. But he felt unprepared to live as simply as his renunciant godbrothers. So, Prabhupada would later recall, those dreams, quote, horrified him. Uncooperative though his family was, he dutifully continued to maintain them while looking for opportunities to advance his mission. And it won't be long now till I'm through. So please start formulating your questions or put them in the chat. This section is called The Spark. Although victorious in the war, Britain would soon lose India to Mahatma Gandhi's nationalist movement. The triumph of his former hero gave Abhay an idea. In July 1947, Abhay wrote Gandhi a letter. An excerpt follows. Quote, I am your unknown friend. You should therefore take a note of warning from your insignificant friend like me, that unless you retire timely from politics and engage yourself 10% in the preaching work of Bhagavad Gita, which is the real function of the Mahatmas, you shall have to meet with such inglorious deaths as Mussolini, Hitler's Tojos met with, all these World War II characters. Prabhupada's telling Gandhi, look, give up politics. And then he also was saying in the letter, let me study Bhagavad Gita with you just for 1 month. Just for 1 month. Just give up all this politics. And I can reveal to you the deepest meaning of Bhagavad Gita. So you will have something really substantial to give to the world. 6 months later, Gandhi was assassinated. Prabhupada later recalled, quote, I wanted to start this movement from India. I even requested Mahatma Gandhi that, Mahatma Ji, you have got some respect all over the world, and you are known as a great student of Bhagavad Gita. Now you have got your Swaraj, the Britishers have gone away. Let us preach Bhagavad Gita, unquote. And then Prabhupada said, my letter might have reached him or not reached him. The secretaries might have rejected. But then he was killed. Abhay's letter now proved prophetic. Although he had hoped to engage Gandhi to advance Lord Chaitanya's mission, Gandhi's demise would soon spark the articulation of his mission's plan. As Prabhupada later reflected, I had my plans and Krishna had his. So that's where we're going to stop with, Prabhupada reaching out to Gandhi. Okay, Prabhu, happy to receive the questions and comments now.
If there are any questions, devotees can raise their hand or put it in the chat box. There's a question in the chat box. Please tell us something more about how Srila Prabhupada would preach as a grihastha in Allahabad or in those areas. We have very less information how he was preaching as a grihastha.
Yeah. Well, all Prabhupada told us was that he would have home programs, but much to his dismay, his wife was just not interested. You know, usually, like you probably experience, if you do have home programs in Bangalore, the husband and wife, if they're the hosts, they're like a team. You know, cooking and cleaning the place and hosting and, you know, kirtan and pravachan speaking and then prasad. So it's a big endeavor. And as I read, when Prabhupada was initiated, he met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta in 1922, and then he didn't take initiation for 11 years because he was in a different orbit. He was in Allahabad, trying to build up his business, and then he moved to Bombay. So he was really trying to do his plan of becoming wealthy, and then once the family business would wind down, he would be free to use the capital to spread Krishna consciousness. That was his plan. But in the meantime, he was reading Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's books, and he was on fire. He was inspired, and he wanted to share Krishna consciousness. Both in Allahabad and Bombay, those leaders said to Bhaktisiddhanta, that he's the real driving force. So, but he was, family and business. So he was trying to have home programs, but she was not interested. She didn't even go to his initiation. I mean, can you imagine that? A brother and a sister went of Prabhupada's, and they weren't even living in Allahabad. They traveled to Allahabad all the way, perhaps from Calcutta, to attend their brother's Diksha ceremony. But Radharani Day, who was right there with Prabhupada in Allahabad, she wasn't interested. As Prabhupada told us, she was a very pious, nice, kind of like we'd say, a Hindu lady. But she just wanted to have a peaceful life, home life. And she was not interested in being a missionary's wife, because Prabhupada was on fire with the mission. And she wasn't. She was, we say in English, a homebody. She just wanted to stay home. So as they were so she would just take the kids and go in the back and leaving, Prabhupada to do everything. So it was very discouraging to him. And finally in 45, I read that letter, where Prabhupada's writing to Gauranga, I am no more interested in these people. They're useless spiritually and they're useless materially. I mean, he had a huge opportunity to buy this building. It was going up for dirt cheap. And I think it was in Kanpur. But they wouldn't let Gauranga, who was the best servant, yet Prabhupada had left them in Calcutta. They wouldn't let Gauranga go. So Prabhupada was just totally disgusted, because if they had let him go, then he could have really helped Prabhupada get that building into shape and crank up the pharmaceutical works. And with pharmaceutical production and sales, it could have actually happened. They could have been living a very high standard of life, because they were pretty materialistic. But even materially, they were lazy and self-centered. So Prabhupada this is too much, these people. But he dutifully went on, supporting them, until finally that famous, tea or me incident in 54. And that was it. Prabhupada just, after 36 years in the Grihastha ashram, Prabhupada just walked out. So he wasn't really, to your question again, he wasn't really able to preach much with his family. Yeah. It was a shame. But he was, once Prabhupada, came west and was encouraging us, his mood was Grihe Tako Vane Tako, like Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Prabhupada's mood was, doesn't matter what ashram you're in, you can preach Krishna consciousness. And he was encouraging the devotees to do that. Of course, in Prabhupada's time with us, we were all in temples. We didn't even have homes, We were all in the commune, in the boot camp, so to speak. But certainly Prabhupada encouraged that in his preaching, because he knew in the future that the Hare Krishna movement expand and people would be living in the wrong place. So that's what we need to do. Okay, more questions?
Yes, Prabhuji. The second question is more like a clarification. When and where exactly Srila Prabhupada started his preaching mission at the Gaudiya Mutt? That's the first part. And second part, was the title Bhakti Vedanta conferred before or after the disappearance of His Divine Grace, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur?
Mm-hmm. Well, as we heard from Srila Bhakti Siddhanta, he never was, in a sense, inside the Gaudiya Mutt like the brahmacharis and the sannyasis. He was doing business on the outside as a kind of we'd say a congregational member. And when they tried to bring him inside, then Bhakti Siddhanta said, no, it's better he's living, he's not living with, what did Bhakti Siddhanta say? It's better he's living outside your company. That's right, outside your company. He will do. He will do everything himself. You don't have to recommend him. So Srila Bhakti Siddhanta, later that year, in November, because someone like Bhakti Siddhanta, Ray of Vishnu, he could see, he was Trikalagya, he could see what was going to become of his own mission. He was confiding to Abhay Charanaravinda. There will be fire in the mud. Agunj valbe, there will be fire in the mud. And so the end of the whole disclosure was, if you ever get money, print books. I wish I could sell the marble off that Bug Bazaar temple that this Jagabandhu, this benefactor, this wealthy devotee had built them a whole new headquarters. I wish I could sell the marble off that temple and just print books. If you ever get money, print books. And in Prabhupada's own time with us, that was Prabhupada's priority. There were two things. Whatever money came into the BBT, first of all, any temple that had book debts, they had to take care of their debts first to the BBT before they could buy more books. So half to the publication of more books as they were coming out, Prabhupada was still translating, and half for the building of temples. So as important as it was for Prabhupada to establish those temples, I mean, we're talking big temples, Bombay, Mayapur, Delhi, Vrindavan, Krishna Balaram Mandir. As important as that was, first, the books came first. So if you ever get money, print books. And that was the family business, as our Vaisheshika Prabhu named his book, Our Family Business. This Prabhupada envisioned, as you'll see in the next lesson, it's called, what's the next lesson? I always forget the title of the next lesson. Let's see. Anyway, it's about the phases.
Is ISKCON branch?
Yes, it's ISKCON branch. So thank you. So as you will see in the next lesson, when Prabhupada founded ISKCON, he had 7 purposes. And the final purpose he was identifying as the publication of literature. And he said, to achieve the aforementioned purposes, to fulfill all the other purposes, which is, it's an educational mission, we're going to print and distribute books. That's, there's nothing wrong with doing business for Krishna, but the first business, Prabhupada said, is to print and distribute books. And everything follows from that inspiration generated by these books. The second question was, when did Prabhupada get the title of Bhakti Vedanta? So that happened in the late 30s, say 39. It's when Prabhupada moved his family back to Calcutta. He just finally gave up on Bombay. It didn't happen. there's 3 times that Prabhupada tried to build up his business, and then 3 times Krishna foiled it. So he was back in Calcutta, and he hung up a shingle that said, Abhay Charan Day and Sons. It's kind of aspirational, wishful thinking. They weren't even really helping him so much by then. But he just opened up a small pharmaceutical works in the front of his place, Sitakanta Banerjee Lane. And then a couple of godbrothers, survivors of the Gaudiya Math implosion, His Holiness Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj and Bhakti Saranga Maharaj. I think there was one more maybe. They contacted, when they found out that Abhaycharan Aurobindo was in Calcutta again, they were in Mayapur, and they contacted him and they said, Bhaktivedanta Prabhu? Oh no, not Bhaktivedanta, that was the title. Abhay Babu, we're thinking we'd like to have a preaching base in Calcutta where the people are, because that's where Guru Maharaj liked us to be, where there was a lot of people. So they had their retreats, they had their ashrams, they had their little mutts. Devananda Saraswat Mutt, that was Sridhar Maharaj's place across the river in Navdvip. So Prabhupada was delighted to hear from him, and he said, oh yes, you must come. And in fact, I have an extra room here. So whenever you come to Calcutta, you can just stay there. And I don't know if Prabhupada said you could pay something for the utilities. I forget if it was, or just seva for the sadhus. So they would come, and Sridhar Maharaj, when we were compiling the Lilamrita, he gave us an interview and he said, I noticed when Swami Maharaj, as he called Prabhupada later, when he came back to Calcutta, he really wasn't interested in his business anymore. He was interested in the Bhagavat. And whenever we came, he would want to be with us to hear and discuss the Bhagavatam. So it was during that time, say from 38, 39, 40, when Prabhupada, he wrote an introduction to the Gita. And I made an indirect reference to it. In the reading, I said that they called him Kavi, poet. But then they also thought that it was time that we recognize Abhay Babu's great qualifications in devotional service. So they thought of this title, Bhaktivedanta. So that part of Prabhupada's name that we know, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, that came from his godbrothers, specifically Bhakti Saranga Maharaj and B.R. Sridhar Maharaj. And Prabhupada graciously accepted their acknowledgement of his service, because he was Bhakti Siddhanta had recognized his expertise in writing and speaking in English. And they were very impressed with what they read. Prabhupada wrote that introduction, and that was like a first draft of what became much later the introduction to our Gita. So it was right around that time, 39, 40, after the Gaudiya Math had already fragmented, and there was a lot of fighting, and it was disgraceful. They were in the courts, and Bhaktisiddhanta's press was sold by one party to cover court costs. Okay, looks like we're at the top of the hour, so we have 45 more minutes.
Yes, Prabhu. So there are some more questions in the chat box. Another question is, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur appeared in Srila Prabhupada's dreams. What is the significance of such dreams when Prabhupada the spiritual master appears in the dream of a person.
Mhm. Well, that we would write Prabhupada, there were letters about that. Now, of course, back in the day when we were writing Prabhupada letters, we didn't know necessarily about Prabhupada's dreams. Although, come to think of it, we know he had these dreams of Bhaktisiddhanta because he told us. So ordinarily, as Prabhupada said in one letter to a devotee, ordinarily we don't place much importance on dreams. Prabhupada writes about this in Krishna book. We've seen gold, we see a mountain, and then we have a dream of a gold mountain. So it's just like the mind's concocting things. But Prabhupada said in the same letter, he said, when you dream of Krishna or the spiritual master, then that's significant. Now, of course, even then, what we're dreaming about Krishna and the spiritual master, it should be consistent with what we're hearing from Guru Sadhu Shastra. It shouldn't be some wild, we hear about Krishna and then we have a dream of Krishna smoking a cigarette. Well, that's crazy. In fact, there's one lecture you might have heard Prabhupada joke about that. Have you ever seen a picture of Krishna in a factory? Slaving away in a factory? Or have you ever seen a picture of Krishna smoking? And Prabhupada's chuckling. He's Atmarama. He's self-satisfied. His internal pleasure potency provides him all the happiness he needs unlimitedly. So, and in Prabhupada's case with these dreams, the dreams were Bhaktisiddhanta, and as far as I know, they started in the 40s. And especially because Prabhupada was becoming disgusted with his family. And so, because Prabhupada, his strategy was to, do the family, as I said, and then become wealthy. And then when the Grihastha phase is over, then Vanaprasth, sannyas, whatever, use your accumulated wealth to do the mission. But Prabhupada, he was just really disgusted. So as far as I understand, that's when he started having the dreams in the 40s. Now, when he started having those dreams, again, he was associating with his sannyasi godbrothers in Calcutta. And as much as he was inspired and enlivened by their sangha, when he started having these dreams about Bhaktisiddhanta coming to him and saying, please come out, take sannyas. Prabhupada said, I was horrified. You must have heard the recording. I was horrified. Oh, Guru Maharaj wants me to take sannyas, because he couldn't picture himself living as austerely and as simply as his sannyasi godbrothers. He was used to, he was married at, he was 22 when he got married. And here it was, in the 40s, and he'd been a grihastha. He'd gone from growing up with his mother and father and brothers and sisters, and then going into grihastha life. So he was a family man. Prabhupada said, I was a family man. And he just couldn't imagine it. So, Prabhupada, he wasn't really ready to entertain that. And he was still dutifully, in 45, when he wrote that letter to Gauranga, his youngest child, Vrindavan Chandra Day, was only 6 years old. So he was still very much supporting dependence. But 9 years later, when Vrindavan was 15, when he did finally walk out of Radharani and the family, after they had pawned his Bhagavatam for tea biscuits. Quite a statement, huh? Then he was ready. He was ready. And finally, when his good friend Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Maharaj heard that he wanted to take sannyas, then Keshav Maharaj said, yes, Bhaktivedanta Prabhu, you must do it. You must take sannyas. And he gave him sannyas. So he was ready then. And he was ready, and Krishna was ready. And Krishna, as time was ready. It was the time factor. Krishna sent Prabhupada to the West to just the right place at just the right time. So it was Krishna. Krishna didn't let Prabhupada become wealthy in India materially. He had other plans. He wanted to make Prabhupada wealthy spiritually and wait until Prabhupada was, as he would say, a grand old man, and glorify him even more by having him start a worldwide, to revive the Gaudiya Sampradaya in old age. Out of nothing, materially he had nothing. So that was a glorification of Prabhupada, and that endeared him to us even more. Okay, so good question about the dreams. Any more?
There are a few more questions. It's being said here that about the business which Srila Prabhupada was doing in various places like Lucknow and Allahabad. Please guide us on how we can also be Krishna-centric while struggling hard with material life.
Well, you can imagine that, Prabhupada set the standard. I mean, what Prabhupada left us, this whole spiritual infrastructure of so many temples, farms, schools, institutes. There was none of that. I mean, the Gaudiya mission in 36 imploded, fragmented. So Prabhupada just kept it alive in his heart while they were all fighting in the courts. And it was a big embarrassment. So Prabhupada was really alone. So of course we're not Prabhupada, and we're not supposed to be, but at least we can become determined. That first time in 32 when he went to Koshi, he was really trying hard. He was just talking business in those days. Anybody who met Prabhupada, in the 20s and the early 30s, he was just business focused. And it was all about, building up the wealth. Not like a materialist, he had a spiritual goal, of course, but he was only able to tear himself away from that intense business focus for a couple of days when he just traveled from Allahabad to Koshi, caught up with the parikrama in Koshi, famous Vrindavan, Brajmandal parikrama. And he just arrived just for the last night when Srila Bhaktisiddhanta came. So he heard him very intently. So now here we are, 2021. And I know in Bangalore you have several centers. So we can take Prabhupada's example too. Even though he was doing business in Allahabad and Bombay, when the Gaudiya Math people approached him, he was thrilled. Okay, I can do something for these people. I'll give them my contacts. I'll introduce them to people. I'll come to the mat. I'll give class. They're asking me to give class. Okay, I can play the mridanga, play the harmonium. So as much as we can give of ourselves, thinking of Srila Prabhupada, what he did, how difficult it must have been for him, we can also sacrifice. Because the temples, even though it is a congregational movement now, the temples are the center, the spiritual center of any congregation. So we need to support that through our funds or our time. What is it? Prana, Dio Vacha, Prana, Artha, Dio Vacha, life, wealth, intelligence, words, whatever we can give. Okay. Next question.
Yes. Next question is, it's a little interesting question. It says that after Srila Prabhupada started preaching full-time as A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, did his family ever come to meet him?
Did his family ever come to meet him?
Yes.
No. I don't know if I've told you what. Yeah, Prabhupada walked out in 54, and they didn't realize that they would never see him again. I mean, everybody but Vrindavan Chandra. Vrindavan Chandra Day, his youngest son, did, when Prabhupada started the preaching in Jhansi, he had an opportunity in Jhansi, UP. Then Prabhupada actually contacted Vrindavan, because Vrindavan was kind of the most, of all the, his wife and children, nobody was really interested. Vrindavan was a little interested. He was the closest one to his father. And he was actually there in 65 in August when he boarded the Jaladuta. We never knew that. Vrindavan told us later that I was there and I was proud of him. I didn't know if I would ever see him again. He was finally going to do his dream at his elderly age. He was finally going to do the mission that he was talking about for years. No friends, no funds, nothing. Just rich with Krishna consciousness. And I was proud of him, even though I was afraid I would never see him again. I was proud of him. So when Prabhupada left, they thought that, oh, he'll be back. He's always coming and going. But that was the last straw, pawning the, trading the Bhagavatam for tea biscuits. So then he never went back. And when they realized that he wasn't coming back, they actually became very bitter. Even though by then, come on, Vrindavan was, let's see, 15, he was 15. Yeah, he was 15. And he was the youngest. So people like Mathura Mohan and others, they were capable of helping the mother. I mean, there were 5 children. They were capable of, supporting the family. But they were just so used to their sugar daddy, as we say in American slang, daddy doing everything. And them not even reciprocating with him materially or spiritually. So they became very bitter. And Prabhupada anticipated that. Now, when Prabhupada was leaving this world, he did put something in his will that there should be some stipend, there should be some allowance for the family, as long as are there any family members alive, there should be some from I think it's from the VBT, must have been, because the VBT was the source of the income, that there should be some allowance. And so he did leave a stipend for his wife, at least his wife. And Prabhupada told a godbrother of mine, Shadadanya, who became Shadadanya Maharaj at one point in his life, that if you ever have trouble with my family, because Prabhupada knew that he had heard that there was hard feelings. And so in his last year, now that his life was winding down, Prabhupada anticipated there might be some attempt by especially Mathura Mohan. He was a communist, and he was very, not a friendly personality. He was anticipating there might be some attempt to claim that ISKCON's assets were really theirs because they were the natural heirs. But Prabhupada had taken sannyas. And sannyas is like civil death. You no more have any obligations. So he had taken sannyas. He left in 54. He took sannyas in 59. And then in 65, he came to the West. But still, Prabhupada knew there might be some attempt to go after ISKCON's assets legally. And so Prabhupada told Shadadanya Maharaj at the time, if you ever have any trouble with my former family, here is the name and number, and a name, address, phone number of a dear family friend who knows me, who knows the family, I think he was an attorney, or at least he was somehow, he was legally savvy. If he wasn't a full attorney, at least he knew law. If you ever have any trouble, look up this gentleman and he can help you. Well, sure enough, in the early 80s, might have been 84, say 30 years after 54, Radharani Dey was still alive, and she had given power of attorney. She had given full legal permission for her son, Mathura Mohan, to do this, to make this attempt to go after ISKCON's assets. Prabhupada was very prescient. He could see what might happen. And sure enough, this Mathura Mohan did this. He filed some case in the court in Calcutta. An absurd case. He was trying to claim that Prabhupada's sannyas was illegal because he still had family members, or he never took sannyas, some crazy thing. So anyway, so when Mathura Mohan did this, Shadadanya remembered that Prabhupada had given him this name, address, phone of this family friend who was fluent in English and fluent in Bengali. And he went to Calcutta and he found him. He found the family friend. And he explained the whole thing. What Prabhupada had told him, 7 years before in 77, if you ever have any trouble, look him up and he can help you. So the friend said, okay, yes, I can help you. I know where your Prabhupada's former wife lives, and I can take you there. So they went, and so the man introduces Radharani Dey, he knew her for years, to Prabhupada's disciple, Shadadanya Maharaj. And So Shadadanya had come, and his objective in meeting Radharani Dey was to persuade Radharani to withdraw, to rescind, to take back that power of attorney that she had given Mathura Mohan, her son, to make this case in the court against ISKCON, to go after ISKCON's assets. So when she realized why he had come, through the interpreter, through the family friend who was explaining everything to Radharani, then she just, let out all her bitterness for 30 years. And she was going on in Bengali, and Shadadanya couldn't understand a word of it, but he was getting the drift just by her tone of voice and by a few words he could pick up, Abhay this and rupees that and family this and so and then she finally had spent her anger and fell silent, and of course it was all being translated for Sharadanya. And then he was praying to Prabhupada the whole time, please Prabhupada, please empower me to make your former wife realize how great you are, because she didn't know anything about what her former husband had done. All she knew was that he had left her and the family. She didn't know about the Hare Krishna movement. She didn't know about, crossing the ocean, almost dying on the Jaladuta, 2 heart attacks. She didn't know about thousands of disciples and reviving, Krishna consciousness again in India through ISKCON. She didn't know any of that. Why? Because she didn't want to know. She was just, wallowing in her own bitterness. So Sharadanya, he was praying, Prabhupada, please give me the heart, give me the words to convey to Mataji what you've done. So he did that. And he said things like, Mataji, he left the family. He left you and the children after 36 years of supporting you. He did finally leave to do his mission, but he made the whole world his family. He saved so many people from hellish life. And then he gave himself as an example. I was simply, I don't know how she probably couldn't understand, psychedelic hippie or anything like that. But he let her know that Prabhupada had saved him from a dark future with hallucinogens and, atheistic, materialistic life, and transformed him into an aspiring Vaishnava. And so many people, officially thousands of disciples, so many temples, so many books. Prabhupada was become a world-renowned author. She didn't know any of that. And so as he was speaking, and as it was being translated, Sharadanya said, Prabhupada was giving him the words and the mood, the heart, to reach his former wife in a way that Prabhupada actually was never able to do when he was married to her. And he could see her heart beginning to change, and he could see the tears coming to her eyes. I had no idea, she was saying. I had no idea of his greatness. And so by the end of it, she said, yes, I will rescind this power of attorney. No more. Yeah. And by then she was receiving a little stipend. I mean, nothing to what they were envisioning, that they could get from ISKCON, but at least it was something. So Prabhupada never looked back. And that was Chris's arrangement. Harishari Prabhu has a theory. Harishari Prabhu, of course, being Prabhupada's servant, who was the best diarist among the servants. And his theory is that if the family had actually been very cooperative with Prabhupada and had become good devotees and had joined him in the mission, that when he passed away, they would have had more claim to the assets. So Harishari's theory is that Krishna arranged it, that Prabhupada would make a clean break in consciousness and in time, and just arrange it so none of them, would have any claim to anything. And yet Prabhupada, out of his, he was thinking of them. He knew that they needed some help. So that was one of the last things he did to provide for her. But no, physically he never saw them again. Good question. Jai Prabhupada. Any more?
Yes, Prabhu. Another question says, I am very much attracted to Srila Prabhupada's Vani. I try my best to listen to his lectures every day. But sometimes I feel that Prabhupada is saying the same thing in many lectures. I feel that I am doing an offense thinking like that. Please.
Well, he is saying the same things a lot, because think, when Prabhupada was lecturing, he was also traveling around the world. And wherever he went, he was laying the groundwork, the foundation. So, of course, it's the same basic message, but delivered in different ways, according to the time, place, the people, time, country, candidate. So if you want to hear more application of those basics, then I recommend you listen to his morning walks, his room conversations. And also Prabhupada's, when Prabhupada gave us the CC, the Sri Chaitanya Chaitamrita, the definitive biography of Mahaprabhu's life and teachings, he gives us a lot in there about philosophy and application, and just a lot of, it's very rich. I recommend that. I don't know, I myself, I don't get tired of, because I need to, here's another answer to your question. We all need those basics. If it's just the basics, then yes, you might be forgiven for wanting a little more variety. And for that, there's plenty in the Vani. It's, the lectures, they tend to be the basics. But again, morning walks, room conversations. But we never, the basics are nectar too. And because we're so, we're entangled in the material energy for so long, we need to hear those basics. As soon as I think that I'm beyond the basics, I'm in trouble. So hear the basics, and then hear ABC, and then in CC you get XYZ. So everything's there. Everything's there. There's plenty in Prabhupada's Vani goes from A to Z. Okay, good question.
Another question is, how was Srila Prabhupada as a person and as a guru? Was he strict? Was he polite? Was he humorous? Just curious, want to know more about him.
Yes, and yeah, he was all of the above. Although someone like me, as I may have mentioned, because I was very neophyte, I mean, even more than I am now, I was a little afraid of Prabhupada. So I kept my distance. I didn't want to commit any, mad elephant offense. So because I was never in a room conversation with him, I was only on 3 morning walks. I mainly only saw him in a grand scene, when he was in a full founder Acharya mood. when he was addressing hundreds of people. So, but because we have so many wonderful memories of Prabhupada, then that's most of my memories of Prabhupada in a more intimate way or a humorous way or just sort of a day-to-day way. I know from other devotees who have shared on video, or if you meet them in person. But take advantage of all those memories, videos, take advantage of the books written by devotees about Prabhupada. There's books by Prabhupada and there's books about Prabhupada. And if those books about Prabhupada inspire you to read Prabhupada's books, then they're of value. Usually that's what happens. When you hear about a person, then you want to hear from that person. So we have Swami in a Strange Land, that interesting kind of updated biography for the 21st century that Yogeshwara Prabhu, my godbrother, wrote for the 50th anniversary of ISKCON. Swami in a Strange Land. We have, of course, the Lilamrita, which will always stand as the definitive biography of Prabhupada. We have The Great Transcendental Adventure, Prabhupada's Travels in Australia. We have Prabhupada and his disciples in Germany by my godbrother Vedavyas Prabhu. We have When the Sun Shines. My godbrother Ranchor wrote a great book about, great because to write the book, he just mainly let the devotees speak who helped Prabhupada launch the British Yatra, especially in London. There's so many books. Prabhupada wanted us to write books, but what better use of writing books than to write about Prabhupada? Giriraj Swami, right? What was that book he just came out with? It's about Sri Radha Rasabihari. I forget the title now. I will build you a temple. Juhu. It's a great epic. It's a saga. Oh, yeah. So, yeah, I remember asking your question, Prabhu, of a personal servant of Prabhupada. When I was a brand new devotee, it was December 1970. I had been in the movement about 6 months. I hadn't even seen Prabhupada yet, but I was reading his books, of course, and I was just curious because there was one devotee in the temple. His name was Trivikram Das Brahmachari, who later became Trivikram Swami. And he and Jayapataka Maharaj are the longest devotees in the movement now, in sannyas, that Prabhupada gave sannyas to, I think since 71. Yeah, that are still sannyas. So I said to Trivikram Brahmachari, what's it like to be with Prabhupada? What's it like to be with the Jagat Guru? The founder Acharya, this great, you might get this kind of, just, it's almost impersonal idea. He's this figure, carved into a rock in a mountain or something. So he was with Prabhupada in England, helping Prabhupada launch the British Yatra. So he said, well, it's like, just imagine if you had a grandfather who was unlimitedly kind, unlimitedly wise, unlimitedly personal, and very simple. He said Prabhupada was exploding a worldwide movement, and he was the calm, he was the eye, the calm eye in the middle of the storm, like the hurricane. The eye of the hurricane is calm, and then the tempest is all around it. So Prabhupada was like that. He was very simple. He'd do the same things, the same time every day, mostly. And And Prabhupada allowed me to have a very kind of, when I was with him, serving him as his servant, he said, Prabhupada let me have this relationship where I felt like I was, whenever I was massaging Prabhupada, I felt like I was a trainer massaging a fighter before he would go out to fight. Because Trivikram had been in the Navy, the United States Navy, and he was pretty handy with his fists. He had been a boxer in the Navy. And so when he was massaging Prabhupada, he felt like he was massaging Prabhupada so he could get him in shape to go out and fight, with Maya, fight the demons. So he said, one day I asked Prabhupada, what's it like to be a spiritual master? I mean, I can't even imagine asking Prabhupada that. What's it like to be, he's massaging. What's it like to be a spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada? So Prabhupada, he kind of chuckled. He said, being a spiritual master is not very difficult. But being a grihasta, that was very difficult. Now think about that answer. He's telling his brahmachari disciple that being a grihasta was very difficult, because he must have seen something in Trivikram which indicated to Prabhupada that this person, he could actually not have to go through that ashram. He could just go right from brahmachari to sannyas. And sure enough, that's what he did. So he was describing how difficult it was to be grihasta. And of course, we know now, Trivikram didn't know then, but we know now from the Lilamrita and things Prabhupada said, how difficult it was. So Prabhupada, he knew just when to be very informal, and he knew when to be formal, and he knew how to relate. He could say just the right things to just the right people at just the right times. Beyond that, I cannot say, because I was never in that intimate setting. Because again, I was a little too afraid of Prabhupada, afraid of committing an offense, and just too attached to the bodily concept of life. I wasn't able to, break through that. But by following Prabhupada's Vani, I can tell you that I feel closer to Prabhupada now. I'm really looking forward to meeting Prabhupada. Because I'm not, the fear, it's not so much the fear. I mean, of course, anybody you love, you're afraid of displeasing them. But I'm looking forward to meeting him personally again. Yes. So we can do that through Vani. Okay, good question. Let's see, we have, only 7 more minutes. So maybe this is the last question.
We have a separate session on Varnashram, Prabhuji. But I have a question, just out of curiosity. What did Srila Prabhupada mean when he said that this Varnashram, spread the Varnashram system? When he said, how can we interpret it so that we can prepare ourselves for the Varnashram session, maybe?
Okay, well, we can deal with that on lesson 6. We're finishing lesson 4 now. So the next one is his ISKCON branch, and then his Varnashram challenge. So we'll deal with that then. I'd rather answer that in context. So.
Okay. Then I think we are done for today's questions.
Okay. Well, thank you again. And so his mission's roots, for the time he met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, I only went up to the time of Gandhi. Because I broke these lessons up a little differently for the Essentials series. I think I do bring up a little bit, just a little recap of what happened after. After Gandhi, there was Prabhupada's time in Jhansi, then there was leaving the family and taking sannyas and the trip over. And then finally that whole, Prabhupada was, he was conceiving the mission. And after, you'll see, I do talk about the first conception that Prabhupada had of how he was going to do the mission. It happened right after Gandhi. As traumatic as Gandhi's assassination was, and even for Prabhupada, I mean, of course, Prabhupada is Bhaktisiddhanta's person now, but still Gandhi had been Prabhupada's boyhood hero, the nationalist movement. And Prabhupada, so it must have been quite a shock when Gandhi was assassinated. And Prabhupada was trying to, he could see that the whole world knew Gandhi. So Prabhupada's first strategy was, the whole world knows Gandhi, nobody knows me, and India has its independence. So if I can just convince Gandhi that this is the real work that he can do for the world now. Everybody's looking to Gandhi, everybody's praising Mahatma Gandhi, Indian independence, Swaraj. But now if Gandhi can really give the world the real treasure India has, is Krishna consciousness. So when Gandhi was assassinated, then you'll see in the next lesson, before ISKCON is manifests, how Prabhupada started manifesting in his mind how he was going to do the mission. It started with after Gandhi, and then Jhansi, the League of Devotees, and then it finally manifests when Prabhupada came alone as ISKCON. But the seeds of it were right in the 40s. Prabhupada's approaching Gandhi, and then afterwards. So, it'll be an eye-opener. Okay, thanks for listening, folks.
Thank you very much, Prabhuji. We're very grateful to you.
And I'm looking forward to being with you again next Saturday.
Yes, Prabhuji.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Jai.
Jai. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.